Hello and welcome to the BuildASoil YouTube channel. Today we have FAQ number 3. Just wrapping up season 3, but we hope to have a lot more FAQs to come. Today we've got a list that's been procured. I've not seen any of the questions yet. I'm gonna go through them as per usual. Let's jump right in. All right, first question. Shuga says, hey Jeremy, thanks so much for all the great information. I have a couple questions if you don't mind. I just flipped a flower in my first grow. Went with the Coots mix, but I'm currently in 5-gallon fabric pots with 4 plants. I wanted to reuse my soil for my next grow, but from my understanding, 5 gallons won't be enough to sustain another cycle. Is this information correct? If so, what do you recommend I should use for re-amendment? Something like compost, minerals, amendments listed in the Coots mix? I top dressed with only compost before the flower flip. Do you think, given the 5-gallon size of the pots, it would be better to do teas instead of top dressing? Or does it really matter? Good question, lots of detail, and I want to make sure you can follow along. So I'm going to process this real quick mentally. And essentially 5 gallons is usually too small in my opinion. Most of the time in the BuildASoil way, we recommend about 15-gallon pots and up. 30 gallons seems to be like the magic number where it's really easy to get big yields, good quality, and not overtax the soil regardless of the size of plant, given most indoor size requirements. That being said, 5 gallons doable. We did it in season 2 where we used a drip system, and it was the only quadrant that did need a little bit of help. And so I used, I believe, a tea and a couple of feeds to make sure that I kept it going. I would personally replant right back into that soil, but with a top dress and feeding, I could at best hope to achieve similar results to the round that I did on season 2. And although the herb was phenomenal, so I wouldn't be scared to do it again, I just prefer a larger container. A couple reasons. One is I would have had more of that same good herb, and I think I would have had less interaction. So for me, it's at the shop. So that means I have to be here, and if I'm not, I have to drive in. Although I set up the drip system, I really did want to monitor things. So I found myself driving in here on a Sunday. There's a difference between enough in the soil and enough available to the plant right now. And if you get a fast growing plant with a dialed environment and it's bigger than its container, more than likely it's going to outpace the biological release, and it would make a lot of sense to feed teas, top dresses, whatever you can do. Let's get more specific. I want to reuse my soil, so what do you recommend I should use as re-amendment? Re-amending to me means dumping out your 5-gallon and remixing it with ingredients. We do have a re-amend kit. Most of our customers have gravitated towards using the craft blend as their re-amend. Main reason being is that it does have some minerals, but it doesn't have as much mineral as the original soil recipe because we put lots of rock dust in to start, and that hasn't depleted right away like some of the other nutrients. So the craft blend would be a very diverse way to reload the soil. The other thing about the craft blend is it's not terribly high in nitrogen, and a lot of our nitrogen release will come from organic matter breakdown, the soil amendments, the compost teas, but the trick is if you want to underdo it, follow the less is more. I think having a little bit of amino acid around to kind of boost it once you get back into the soil will really help, because that'll release the nitrogen needed where the rest of the phosphorus, potassium, mineral density, trace minerals, that can all be covered through that craft blend re-amend. On top of that, a lot of people will grab Big 6 or a TM7 or some sort of trace mineral that focuses on the important ones like zinc and cobalt and boron, and those should be re-amended. But a lot of people think in a mixed media, it's better to apply those occasionally than try and load the soil with the right amount. And I'm kind of that opinion. So to keep it very, very simple, most people grab our craft blend, they mix it into the soil, add it maybe a little bit of compost or castings, and if you're mixing on a tarp, mix that up, put it back in your 5-gallon. At that point, you could probably get as good, if not better than results from your first time. And then if you were happy with your first time, I would follow a similar top dress and tea schedule. I would consider going up to maybe a 15-gallon and starting with there. And you don't have to start with it full, but I feel like it's a better situation for no-till. That's easier to keep up with top dressing and teas than a completely taxed soil. When you have a depleted soil, if you don't dump it and re-amend it, it's still gonna be pretty depleted, which means that if you do top dress, that gives the feeder roots spots to get the heavy nutrition. The rest of the roots will be in fairly depleted soil, and then you can give teas. And the reason I like teas is the teas will cause nutrient cycling from the biology that'll help eat that top dress, deliver those nutrients, make them available faster. And it'll provide some water-soluble nutrients that are very gentle for the plant to keep up with. The only time I only do teas is if I don't have room. Like, meaning I've literally top dressed myself out of home here, and I don't want to make it so when I water it spills out the sides. Then I'll switch to teas instead of top dressing because I don't have any more room. That was a big one. All right, Davis, next question. Davis says, diatomaceous earth. I thought about putting a layer of this between harvests. I just had major infestation of thrips and possibly spider mites, but I figured it would be dangerous for the worms. Will it be harmed? No, worms are totally fine with it. Diatomaceous earth doesn't harm them whatsoever. And I'm sure there's research information that documents this, but from my personal experience, you can literally open your worm bin, put a 2-inch layer of diatomaceous earth, anything that's flying will be completely gone just by the barrier itself, let alone the fact that they're sharp diatoms, right? And you can wait a couple of weeks because underneath there, the worms have plenty of moisture, and then interrupt it by mixing it in, and you'll notice that all the worms are happy and none of them are having any problems. So I would say use that as much as you'd like. I think the reason why people don't use diatomaceous earth in cannabis is, you know, to use it right, it's kind of dusty. You don't want it on your herb. In a vegetative plant, it's fine, but it seems to not work quite as well when it gets wet. I have noticed that in our greenhouse for vegetables, it did eradicate the pill bugs. So if you have a problem with beneficials getting out of hand, I do know that it does harm the pill bugs, that really dries them out, but the worms don't have an issue with it. And I don't see a reason not to do it. You could keep it dry by dusting it in between rounds, and then you could literally shop vac it off the top if you didn't want to reincorporate it. Reincorporation wouldn't be a problem. It's a high silica dust, but it would absorb a lot of moisture. So you want to make sure that we don't create kind of a dead zone, if that makes sense. That's hard and hard to water through. Good question. Thanks, Davis. All right, Hallie 100 says, do you think a wine fridge would be a good herb curing cabinet for small amounts? You know, this is a great question. I would just look at the wine fridge and see what the temperature settings that are available. And I believe that a wine fridge should give you the temperature control between red and white to be able to really control where it's not that cold, if that makes sense. And if I could keep it in that 55, 60, 65 degree temperature inside a wine fridge, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I've been thinking about that for my house. Unfortunately, the amount of jars that I'd like to keep would be probably slightly bigger than a small wine fridge, just so that I could have a decent sized harvest tucked away for long term. But for a small selection, I think it'd be phenomenal, right? If you could keep it at 60% humidity and 60 degrees, meaning at least in the jar at 60%. And the way I optimize that is by drying properly and slowly, knowing it's at the right moisture level, and making sure my jars are full. If they're half full, I'm not confident the humidity is going to keep. And then because you're in sealed jars, it's not like the humidity of the fridge really matters. So 60 degrees would probably be ideal. But for long-term storage, since it's already dried and cured, I would think you can go colder. There's a lot of people that would keep it in the refrigerator. I don't really like that, but I don't see a problem with it, especially for long-term storage. I think the real issue comes when you talk about freezing. Some people are really hesitant to do that because it can crystallize the moisture that's in there or cause degradation of quality based on expansion of liquid. And while I think there might be a right or wrong way to do it, I keep all of mine at regular temperature, room temperature, and I just smoke it fast. It seems to be a good formula. But lately, especially with the 10 by 10 coming down, I've been thinking about getting something for temperature control. So really good question. And the short answer is yes, I think it would be great. Just make sure it's not too cold. But offhand, I think it would be perfect. Luke, I got a question for everybody. Anyone do 12-12 from seed with good yield? Personally, I've done it with great yield. I just have a lot of plants when I do that. You can see on this last round, we did 12-12, and it's possible it caused a little bit of stress on the feminized seed. So maybe be aware of that as a possible factor, since we'd be forcing them to do something that's not totally natural. Beyond that, I'm about to harvest that plant, and it's the only one that I waited to harvest, and it's nugged out from top to bottom, albeit fairly small. Had I filled in a high plant count with that level of stackage on those plants, I think I'd be really stoked on the yield. So the secret is, when it comes to smaller plants or flipping from 12-12, is get a good stretching strain and pack them in Sea Green style. High plant count, single cola. Get really, really good results. I let that one bush out. It's because I didn't really have a high plant count. But that would be a really good strategy to get high yield. All right, next question. Canna Cultivation Club says you should collect food scraps from local restaurants and businesses for food for the pig. It's a great idea. I know that Growing Organic was doing a local food production or food pickup for composting. We've considered doing something like that. A lot of times what we do is we go to City Market and we clean out the discount area where they've put it in little bags for like $1 a bag. We also bring all of our food scraps from home and we encourage employees to do it, but you're right, it is a really good suggestion. And now that we have 2 pigs, it actually might be warranted at this point. Thanks for the suggestion, I really appreciate it. And I'm just glad that people are even thinking about the pig. I think it's really cool. Next question, Caps says, I've noticed a lot of growers using humic acid nearly every watering, and that a lot of pre-made liquid additives like ferments or microbe products also have humic acid. Compost teas also add a lot of humic material. So my question is there such thing as too much? Probably. Nature deals with balance, and I think growing in straight humic acid might prove to be a problem. However, I very rarely add it. I look at humic acid like this. When it's raw, it's good to increase organic matter and absorb what's in your soil and give it back slowly. So it's not leached out on the farm. You don't want your phosphorus running out in the groundwater. So that's a good thought. But when we're adding it to products, oftentimes we're absorbing what's in the product to deliver that specifically, and it's very small amounts. So our micronutrients, we mix it with the micronutrients so it's absorbed in there, and it is a great chelating agent to help give back those micronutrients in a totally natural way, but we're talking very small amounts. Compost tea has humic acid, but ridiculously low amounts when we talk to humic acid. The humic acid that you're most often getting on the market is a byproduct of like petrified forests, and that's why it's so potent. It's like thousands of years old, and it's broken down. Where we're getting from fresh compost, I kind of picture in my mind thousands of pounds of compost for little tiny amounts of humic acid. So I think in that regard, it's gonna be hard to overdo it. But I also think it's easy to hit the point of diminishing return. Our potting soils have unbelievably high percentage of organic matter. I don't think they really require any more. Humic acid is typically a trick on large scale to say this soil has no organic matter. If we put some humic acid, it'll act as if it did have organic matter. Organic matter is the natural buffer. So I don't think we need humic acid really. When it comes to microbial products, it makes a ton of sense because humic acid is such a good buffer, like it stabilizes these concoctions not to be so volatile. And so sometimes you'll see, in fact, I'm not sure if the ferment companies are looking into it or not, but there's a number of people that are adding humic acids to some ferments or to stabilize some microbial products, and it makes a ton of sense. The microbes need like a high surface area, and they also need some initial starter food. And so if you think of organic matter that would be missing, being that it's not natural soil, humic acid is kind of that carbon, that organic source, and it's very small amounts. So when I look at microbial products that are powdered, typically there's a carrier powder, and then there's the food products. And the food products usually are like a humic acid to keep things stable and add the carbon. And also there's like a seaweed extract or something that has nutritional value. And those are very, very common, and I know they're proven to work with microbes, so it makes a lot of sense, but it's very small amounts. Like the carrier powder is typically a diatomaceous earth, like in Rootwise, or in other products that I don't think are as selective about ingredients. They'll use like a talcum powder. All sorts of reasons why I would prefer a diatomaceous earth, but humic acid content is really, really low, and then you use really small amounts of the microbes. So I think each one of those questions is more like humic and fulvic acids are so magical, they're at the forefront of the latest science, and so people are grabbing them in instances where it's helping for stability or delivery, but I don't really believe we've reached a negative effect from excess use. But as far as budget goes, remember, our soils are really high in organic matter, probably don't benefit from the added humic acid, unlike a hydro grow or something that literally has none. So be leery of the tests that you read that say this adds a huge amount of difference, because it was probably a sterile hydroponic environment that when it was added, it made a significant difference. Even like we carry BioAg, they have studies in hydroponics where the humic and fulvic made a 10-fold difference in the amount of nutrients that they needed. Well, it makes sense if you're just flushing the nutrients out and this finally holds on to it for the first time. Because I'm not an expert in all these subjects, but this is my view on it, and I hope that helps answer your question. If there's other people that would like to drop in here and discuss it, I think that most people that I talk to that use humic acid would probably agree. You probably can't overdo it, but we probably are. So food for thought. I always think that the BuildASoil way, even though we sell products, is that less is more, and most of the stuff is not needed, especially in copious amounts. But when I consider the fact that if I like a few products, they happen to have a small amount in there, it's probably for good purpose, and it's probably not overdoing it. But now if I'm gonna go add a whole bag of humic acid and add it back into my soil, it may be a waste of my budget. Greg, have you ever had a strain that didn't stretch? You talked about them 2Xing or 3Xing during stretch, and I've been through it as well. But my current grow, the plants didn't or barely stretch at all. First time this has ever happened, and I was wondering if you've ever seen this before. Yes, absolutely, it happens all the time. But I feel like it doesn't happen more so because of my genetic selection. I like that fueliness, and a lot of times that comes from these Chem D crosses or OG Kush crosses or something that oftentimes is a lankier, stretchier genetic, and it comes from that hybrid vigor that comes from probably crossing narrow leaf and broadleaf. And for whatever reason, I don't grow a lot of really short broadleafs, but Bubba Kush crosses, stuff that is just showing really broadleaf oftentimes won't jump. And then in this last grow, season 3, we grew some of the Pakalolo the 1, and there's one of them that just literally didn't stretch. Like, it just stayed the same size, bushed out, and it probably yielded decently, but I was expecting like a 3x stretch, just considering the fact that it, was a hybrid. Short answer, yes. Longer answer is, to get the desired results, you should make sure that you know what's going to happen. And so in season 3, the reason why it was a bummer that it didn't stretch is because I would rather have a non-stretcher than not plan for a quadruple stretcher. So I erred on the side of caution. I kept the plants kind of small. And then when it didn't stretch, I got a little less yield than I could have had I known that it was a non-stretcher. So if you're gonna run these genetics again, you now know. So I would veg 2 or 3 times as long, which is why a lot of people don't run those genetics, because to get the yield, you have to veg longer, and that's not good for commercial production. So it is what it is. For a long time, the shorter the better, and the shorter flowering cycle the better, because a lot of times it was like crawl spaces, indoor grows, and stuff where you couldn't have any size. Now we're after quality, taste, all that, and structure almost plays a secondary fiddle there. But if you don't know, you just bought a pack and you're like, man, I really want to plan ahead, typically the breeder can tell you. Other people on the forums that have run that cross before can tell you, and so you should be able to maybe identify. But within one pack, there can be a lot of variety. So if you're unsure and you're really worried about it, do like I do and err on the side of caution the first go. And that's part of the cost to pheno hunting. And there's a reason why people want to have a winning cut. You don't have to tinker. You can max out yield. You can know exactly how much it's going to stretch. You can know it's all going to be A+. But that comes with a huge security risk to pests, problems, and what DJ Short called the road to blandum, in the sense that if you always only grow what everyone else is growing, you may miss out on what you could have found for yourself that hits you right, that you love, that has a story behind it for you. And so I think every grower is battling with that. We want the latest and greatest, plus we want to hunt for our own stuff and find the best. I appreciate you guys asking these questions. I promise to do more. I know we got a little bit away from it from season 3, and that's partially because we were right in the middle of busy season. And you got to understand, this business came from my garage, and we're implementing a lot of new systems, processes, procedures, and it's been a big stretching exercise for us. And I've been really attentive to that. So has the whole team. And that's not because we have this huge desire to grow, but because we have the desire to share this message. And when we do, people want an order. And then if we don't grow, then we can't keep up. And that means bad customer service and experience. And so all I'm trying to get at is, I really appreciate you guys asking these. We promised to do more. We got busy, but we put in some really good systems, and I think this next season is gonna be one of our best ever. So thanks for being a part of it. If you've got questions about these questions or anything else, drop them in here. We'll be sure to go through them. Until then, I'll see you guys on the next BuildASoil episode.